Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining the webinar today. We're going to begin in a few moments. Please stand by.
Hello?
Hi, Dana. We're live.
Shall I just begin then?
Yes, please.
Hello and welcome to this Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Voice of the Customer webcast discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Interarbor Solutions, and I'll be your moderator for today's live discussion on how Ziften Technologies leverages big data capabilities to provide next-generation endpoint security. Data and privacy breaches continue to plague businesses and global commerce with startling new revelations of majorly compromised systems happening nearly daily. To help thwart wrenching damage to business reputations, head off plunging stock prices, and mitigate compliance nightmares, companies need real-time and even predictive protection more than ever. The key to containing the damage from breaches and data loss comes with the speed in which the problem is detected and the remedies put in place. And the key to speed of detection comes from instant evaluation of multiple variables that together make complex detection analysis possible. We're here today with an executive from Ziften Technologies to learn how lightweight agents gather the needed data from across many indicators of malfeasance across devices and networks to allow for powerful and fast detection and reaction. We'll hear now how a powerful big data platform, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Vertica, delivers the scale, speed, and instant analysis to provide enterprise-wide visibility into the latest breed of security ills. Ziften has not only recently put its Vertica deployment into full action, stay with us. We're going to learn more about how they've explored advanced big data capabilities, building on that platform, and are closing the gap on time to detection, near instant early warnings, and hugely valuable ability to locate and contain security concerns at the edge. Here to explain the paybacks from taking data scale and speed of analysis limits out of the security detection picture, please join me in welcoming Mike Hamilton, Senior Vice President of Product at Ziften Technologies in Austin, Texas. Welcome, Mike.
Good morning. How's everybody doing?
We're doing well. Before we begin, I'd like to provide a reminder to our audience. Please, as you listen to the discussion today, gather your questions and add them to the web interface. We'll address them towards the end of our presentation. And now I'll hand it over to you, Mike.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Dana. So before we get started, I just wanted to spend a few minutes, giving the audience and everybody out there just a quick high-level overview of Ziften, sort of what we do and the problems we're solving, holistically. So you have a little bit of context, and then we can, and we'll certainly dive more into HP Vertica and how that plays into what we do on a day-to-day basis. So, first thing is I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the customer pain points that Ziften is out there aiming to solve. Really, it's about the inadequate client-to-cloud visibility and security, and what we mean by that is from desktop, laptop, server, cloud infrastructure, data center, the lack of visibility and ability to see malware, see bad things happening, see intrusion attempts, and these are just a couple of the sort of the data points that some of our customers have pointed to. Things like unknown assets. So we've got some ability to detect unknown assets, whether or not those are BYOD devices, those are virtual machines that have been spun up by some bad actor. And what we see is there's oftentimes up to 30% of the assets on a network are unknown, whether or not those are physical systems, BYOD, iPhones, Android devices, or that there are other VMs that have been left behind by development teams, et cetera. There's also a continuing lack of cloud visibility as the cloud migration happens, data centers, infrastructure moving to the cloud. A lot of the infrastructure that's used to pick up visibility, whether or not that's IPS firewall, et cetera, don't follow along with the cloud. So the Ziften technology does follow and does provide visibility into that cloud and hybrid environment. Undetected breaches. Everybody hears about the Verizon reports and how many months or weeks or even years sometimes that breaches go undetected. And then there's also the lack of look-back forensic capability. So obviously we've gone with the HP Vertica platform, and what that's done is allow us to go much further back from a forensic capability standpoint, looking backwards months, years, and that enables our customers to go back and find things that may have been unknown 12 months ago or 18 months ago, but allows them to really go back and see the full scope of a potential incident, a potential breach. So let's talk a little bit about what we call client-to-cloud security and visibility, and really it's being able to deploy and maintain continuous as well as look-back visibility across the entire infrastructure, whether or not that's user behavior, systems, applications and binaries, or network connections, network activity from the endpoints, from the cloud infrastructure, from the data center. So there's really four pieces of that story. There's the assessment component. It's risk assessment. It's looking for those unmanaged and unidentified assets. It's looking at patch management levels, patch levels, Windows update, Linux update levels, making sure that the entire environment is as clean and in the right state as possible. Then you've got the prevention component of that. It's hardening the systems. There's some really cool analysis and work we've done at Ziften on malware that looks to be, that checks whether or not it's executing in a virtual environment, whether or not it's a sandbox or malware analysis tool. And there's some pretty cool things we're working on and doing that helps prevent malware from executing by trying to emulate what it looks like to be on a virtual system. Hardening systems also with respect to making sure those patches are deployed to all the endpoints across the infrastructure, things of that nature. On the detection side, it's being able to find and contain threats that get through and reducing those overall dwell times. What that means is getting data into our platform as fast as humanly possible, as well as being able to do advanced analytics, detections, algorithms on that data as fast as possible to be able to identify those intrusions, those data breaches, those exfiltration attempts, things of that nature. And then finally, from a response perspective, it's being able to take action at the endpoint level, whether or not that's quarantine a system, take it off the network, whether or not that is to integrate with a third-party firewall device and blacklist IP addresses, whether or not it's to kill a process or uninstall something or modify a registry key. Those response capabilities are just as important as the detection, and connecting these all four of these pieces together through our platform, of course, depending heavily on HP Vertica, allows us to provide this functionality for our customers. So a little bit about the visibility and security everywhere. There's really the four pieces. Data center capability, so that's running inside the virtual machines in the data center and in the cloud, regardless of cloud provider. Whether or not it's a container, that lightweight agent that we provide to collect this information runs in all those environments, whether or not that's on network systems, desktops, laptops, et cetera, or as those devices go mobile and they're working from the Starbucks or the coffee shop around the corner, all that visibility, whether or not they're on network, off network, in the data center or in the cloud, is paramount to making sure there's no places to hide, and the attackers have no place to hide, and we can effectively identify them and get them out of the network. So, I'll talk quickly about the products that we offer through this platform. We have Ziften ZDR and zFlow. zFlow is IPFix telemetry with endpoint attributions. That's the user, the hash, the process, the system that was making network connections embedded in standards-based IPFix format. That's really heavily network-centric. And then you have our ZDR platform, which is looking at the binaries that are executing on the endpoints, the network connections they're making. It's looking at the vulnerability and patch levels of those systems. It's looking at user behavior, anomalies from their normal usage patterns. We bring all that data into our security data cloud, which is, of course, sitting on top of HPE Vertica. We bring in partner integrations for threat feeds and other intelligence, malware analysis, integrations into firewalls and other network devices, and bring that all together to bring the endpoint, cloud, and data center component to a security infrastructure and posture. So just some quick sample customer benefits on things that we found with our customers out there sitting on top of this platform, and then we'll dive into the Vertica component of what we do. This first point here is visibility, being able to reduce those unknown and rogue assets. So the Ziften agents, as deployed out in the infrastructure, are able to identify other systems that are not currently managed by the IT operations and security infrastructure and the teams. So we've seen environments where we're able to reduce the unknown and rogue assets in those devices by 98%. From an assessment perspective, by using the Ziften platform, we're able to reduce support software and hardware savings by looking at unused software that isn't used by the employees in the environment, looking for software that may be vulnerable, and helping assess the patch levels and the Windows update and Linux updates in that environment. From a prevention perspective, because we have that deep visibility coming from the endpoint, with patch management, patch levels, with malware executions and detections, we can reduce the non-compliant assets towards, with respect to corporate policy, by 80% with a couple of customers. Because of our broad visibility, we're able to reduce annual tech support calls by 5 to 10%, which can be huge savings. And then really the most important thing is that we've seen response times for incidents and data breaches from what previously may have taken a customer 4 or 5 days down to 4 hours. And there's just a massive improvement and enhancement in their incident response and security processes by bringing the Ziften platform and solution inside their environment. So at this point, I'll run through a couple of quick points on why Ziften and why we chose HPE Vertica as our backend platform, and then we'll get Dana back and answer some questions and go forth. So a couple of main reasons. First, one of the most important and critical factors on the security side is there is a ton of data coming from all across the environment. There are customers that have upwards of 4, 5, 600,000 endpoints, even up to 1 million endpoints, whether or not those are desktops, laptops, or servers on the data center, cloud infrastructure. That just becomes a massive quantity of data, potentially terabytes of data a day. And HPE Vertica for us has been massively scalable, both on an individual instance as well as being able to horizontally scale, add nodes to our cluster, and we instantly increase our capacity and scalability. There's all sorts of other cool features built into Vertica. The compression ratios that we've seen in HPE Vertica range from 10x compression up to 40x compression, depending on some of the data types. That's a massive reduction in our infrastructure when we're hosting for our customers. And for our customers that deploy our platform on-premise, it's a massive cost savings for them in terms of their infrastructure. Which brings me to the next point, is that Vertica was really one of the only solutions that we found on the database and analytic warehousing componentry that was able to support our need to host both in the cloud, AWS, Azure, SoftLayer, as well as customers that have a need and, in fact, sometimes requirements to host those on-premise. Finally, some of the integrations that the HP Vertica brings in. They have direct Kafka access. So we use Kafka as our message broker within our entire platform, which, again, horizontally scalable. It allows us to plug data directly in without having to broker data around, and it's just an extremely efficient way of getting data into the platform. There's distributed R access as we build out our analytic capabilities for both predictive, for some machine learning activities, for statistical and peer grouping analysis, all those sorts of things that HP Vertica brings to us that we use and will expand upon as Ziften, as we continue to develop our platform on the features and functions that the Vertica has brought to us. So those are really a couple of high-level points of why we chose Vertica, but really it's fast, it's scalable, and there's a incredible library of integrations and analytic functions that help us detect security incidents faster and help us take remediation steps for our customers faster, really than ever before. So that's pretty much the Ziften and why we chose HP Vertica as to power our backend platform.
Well, thanks very much, Mike, for that presentation. I'd like to remind our audience, if you have questions, we'll be happy to address them later in this webcast. You'll see where to apply those in the web browser or interface that you're using. So, Mike, I want to go up a little bit in terms of looking at the market and understanding why you approached your solutions the way you did. You're seeing now, in the way you're describing this, very deep and granular inspection and analysis of information that's relevant to endpoint security. But I'm wondering how things have changed over the past, say, 3 to 5 years. It seems to me that most security was not that long ago focused on the PC, and in many times people were just getting virus detection and malware detection levels of support. Tell me a little bit about the transition, what's happened when people go from an older PC model to this endpoint and granular approach that you've taken.
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, historically, and I would venture a guess that just about everybody that all of our guests on this webinar probably have some form of antivirus or anti-malware or a combination thereof, on their systems and on their their Macs, their Windows PCs, or I'm sure some of these guys out there probably are listening to us potentially even on a Linux system. Really, there are people out there that say that antivirus is dead and it's moving up to different levels. So we don't subscribe necessarily to the notion that AV and anti-malware is dead. What we do is find the things and provide the continuous visibility for things that either slip through and or have not yet been discovered and provided back through the updates to the AV engines. Really, it becomes a complementary solution, which is why our lightweight componentry. So all of our agents are non-kernel based, they're non-driver based, so there's no reboot, very lightweight, so that we can work in conjunction with the ability of the AV and anti-malware technologies to reduce the attack surface. I mean, certainly you don't want to be wide open for attack. You want to reduce the attack surface as much as possible, and then it drastically reduces what you have to look for, sort of in the needle in the haystack. It's a whole lot easier to find that needle when the haystack is much smaller than it could be. So really that's what we're trying to solve, that problem, the things that slip through, and when they do slip through, providing historical context and look back to identify who was the person that brought that into the environment, what was the attack vector, attribution of potentially who was trying to make that attack. Did it come while they were off network and didn't have access to the firewall protections in the corporate environment? And that's really what we do, and what that shift has happened. It's really just identifying holes in previous security technologies and filling them so that we can create that comprehensive security strategy.
Right, and Mike, of course, we've also seen in the past several years an increase in the sophistication of attacks, and we've also seen a vast increase in the damage that can be done in a fairly short amount of time. So tell me a little bit more about how your model works to address the issues around complexity and sophistication of attacks, and reducing the time that you can stem the damage?
Yeah. So let me go to the time first, because I think that's particularly relevant to this conversation with respect to Vertica. And certainly time is a huge component of attacks. Obviously, as these attackers come in, advanced attacks, whether or not they're nation states or protest groups, et cetera. Once they get in, it's imperative to detect that as fast as possible. Once they're in, it gives them time. If you give them time, they can find other places to hide and obfuscate themselves. They can pivot to other systems. They can escalate privileges and get access to systems. They can do their recon work and find where those honeypots of the crown jewels, the intellectual property, or in the case of presidential debates, you've got email leaks getting trickled out continuously. And so that speed and what Vertica has brought to us is the ability to process that much faster, provide not just process it faster, but also be able to collect more information and still process at the same speed. So think of it in terms of a detective who's just looking and hunting for things with a magnifying glass. He sort of has a scope of view that's very small, but you give him binoculars, he can see farther away. You give him a telescope, he can see even farther away. As you expand the tools, and I'm sort of using that as an analogy for the data, you expand the scope of the data, but still be able to look at it, process it, analyze it, do your time series analysis, your peer grouping analysis for anomaly detections. Being able to do those things quickly allow you to make those detections faster. And that's really what it's all about. As the complexity of these things happen, you have to be able to piece different attacks. Potentially, there could be multiple attacks from different actors going on at the same time. Being able to connect the dots helps to find those advanced attacks. And really, HP Vertica has enabled us to do that with the power and speed, being able to bring in the large data volumes as well as analyze it very quickly.
It's very intriguing to me, Mike, to hear about your data-driven analytics approach, because you're using a mix of variables. This, to me, means that you're adaptable to whatever the sophistication, delta, or change might be. It also strikes me, though, that by looking at these variables, using this very powerful rapid analytics capability, that you're able to move beyond just what we look at as perhaps baseline security. And I'm thinking about diagnostics around issues for compliance, regulation, privacy. So let's look at how your model works for security, but how does it apply perhaps more broadly? It seems to me that it's quite extensible.
Yeah, that's a great point, and thanks for picking up on that. So that's actually one of the interesting things about Ziften and how we've sort of taken a slightly different approach to the endpoint. And some people call it endpoint detection and response or endpoint threat detection and response. Really, we take a much more holistic view. If you look at some the players that vie for the same customers and dollars that we do, they're very focused on specifically malware execution and the propagation of specific malware. And that's certainly a piece of it and a piece of detecting and responding to threats. But really, there's more to it, which is also bringing in lots of operational componentry, to streamline the ability of the security and operations teams to really work together, share the same set of tools so that we don't have completely disjointed tool sets trying to solve very similar problems. So we collect a ton of information around compliance. Like I mentioned before, with the patch levels of the systems, we actually pull in all the data from the National Vulnerability Database, so that as new vulnerabilities pop up and get published, we can automatically trigger alerts in real time as those happen, and point you exactly to the assets that are vulnerable to those specific vulnerabilities. There's a ton of enterprise reporting that we can do because of the power of the database, because of Vertica, around PCI compliance or a lot of the other industry compliance, whether or not they're financial or health or insurance standards. And when you first asked the question, you mentioned the sort of the dynamic, the deltas in the environment, the dynamic nature of these things. We've actually just announced this a couple of days ago. But one of the cool things about Vertica and our ability to embed this into our platform is we've actually announced and are delivering through this platform that we've been rolling out based on Vertica, a continuous delivery model where new features and functions are delivered continuously. So every week, our customers get new exciting features that is enabled by a lot of the cool analytic functions and integrations with R and Python and C++ with Vertica. We can deliver those on a continuous basis rather than our customers waiting, 2 or 3 releases a year with new features, new capabilities for detection and response. We stream those out continuously as new vectors happen and are discovered. We can incorporate those back into the platform essentially in real time.
Mike, you really exemplify some of the major trends in cloud, which is that ability to centralize and have rapid iterations, whether it's an application upgrade or, in your case, the data for analysis of security concerns. You also are showing the importance of core to edge, so cloud perhaps being core out to the edge and how that can be very powerful, and that the interplay between them can allow us to do things we couldn't do before. I wanted to also look at one more variable in the way that you're doing this, and that's to examine the network, because as we know, people are very mobile, and they're taking their laptop and they're working on planes, and they're connecting at 30,000 feet or on a train or in a hotel. So variability on the network, how is your model and the ability to gather data and analyze it particularly helpful given the new reality of networks?
Yeah, again, great question. So our Ziften technology is really key to what we do on the network side. So I'm very passionate about our Ziften technology. My background, comes out of, I used to be a network processor designer, designing circuits on network processors that, operate and power IPSs and cellular backhaul infrastructure all over the world. Moved into sort of network and security testing. So the network component of what we do is a huge differentiator for us. And Ziften, being able to look at all the network connections that are happening, looking at the volumetrics around them, looking for data exfiltration, and having that collection capability from whether or not that's in the cloud, which is an extremely valuable entry point from an attacker perspective, exploiting, website, back-end web vulnerabilities, whether or not that's PHP or, some other type of, it could be Java, et cetera, and getting into the cloud infrastructure, which oftentimes have direct VPN connections back to corporate, where they can then, feel free to pivot and, recon and move through. So being able to connect the dots as systems are on network, as they're off network, again, from the Starbucks, from, the CEO's office at home, being able to connect those dots everywhere allows us to remove all the blind spots and all the dark corners of the environment that attackers can hide, and try to make progress and move on and get after those crown jewels and continue to do damage to the company and their reputation and their intellectual property, or potentially their presidential campaigns.
Let's look a little bit, Mike, at how some of the other services and products that HPE has pulled together around Vertica might bear on this. We've seen a lot with APIs, another benefit of the cloud model that most people are now involved with to varying degrees. And we've seen how it's important to be able to leverage APIs for things like getting access to data, new kinds of information, unstructured video, and so forth. I'm not sure this has a bearing directly on what you're doing, but it seems to me that it might. Tell me, if you could, about what, other than Vertica, among the HP stable of products and services come to bear on your maturing and expanding the capabilities of your product at Ziften.
Yeah, so obviously HP's got a wide range of products. Specifically with Vertica, we've been able to use Vertica to bring in. I mentioned early on that we bring in a ton of information externally into our platform that we ingest and bring in, connect the dots with all of our data. And there's some really cool HP functionality around some flex table. There's these flex table constructs that help us bring in new data sort of on the fly and on demand, and make it much easier for us to integrate with new partners, either for threat feeds, bringing in Stix Taxi, bringing it in from Alien Vault, or whatever those sources are, being able to even custom sources from the customer, and being able to bring those in and utilizing that sort of functionality inside Vertica. And then you've got some of the other HPE products, sort of the HP family over the years. Obviously, with the ArcSight stuff, obviously we integrate into ArcSight for providing our intelligence back out. We have adopted this open visibility model, which allows us to get data back into other platforms as well as getting it into our platform. And whether or not that's sort of the tipping point, which of course I know has been no longer in the HP family, but still a sibling, or ArcSight or any of those things, we try to incorporate and integrate into all the other platforms that are out there, especially with whatever environments our customers have, so we can make sure we're maximizing the value of their entire security investment and infrastructure, and not just buying another point product.
Yeah, to your point, some of these products that HP have pulled together are finding their way into other ownership, but with HP having a major stake in that ownership. So I think it's quite safe to say that the ecosystem in which these solutions have been crafted is alive and well for quite some time. Do you feel that way as a partner, that the ecosystem is intact and that this combination of cloud, big data, security, and then the development and innovation around APIs and services is the wave of the future? You're taking advantage of it. Do you feel confident that that's going to remain a very strong combination for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's any question about that. Everybody's heard, or at least most people have heard the old mantra, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a village to keep the bad guys out as well, to band together and utilize all of our strengths and pull those together to create the most robust infrastructure and security protections and detections and responses as possible. So, so I totally agree with you. There's still, very close-knit, ecosystem to really provide customers with a compelling solution and not just, again, point products.
All right. Once again, a reminder to our audience, if you do have any questions or comments, or you want to ask Mike or myself anything about the market trends or what these products and services can do in more specificity for your use case or your environment, please do add those to the presenter or rather the question panel on the web app. Let's start closing up, Mike, by looking at what comes next. We touched on this a little bit earlier about why even beyond security in areas like privacy and compliance, your solution and the big data, the cloud combo capabilities can bring. What comes next? What degree can we go beyond security when we have this level of insight, adaptability, and big data analysis on the fly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you hit it on the head with the compliance componentry. As we start to loop in and bring in more of the HP, the Vertica analytic functions, there's all sorts of cool predictive things from a compliance perspective. You see, a user that has access to sensitive data. You see them making anomalous network connections to, foreign nations. You can start to see, okay, you can start to make predictions and start to learn user behaviors with a lot of the very powerful analytics built into the platform. So you can start doing, hey, before we have that HIPAA issue and we start, leaking accidentally, people's health information or social security numbers, et cetera, starting to be able to make those predictions, prevent the compliance issues. There's massive fines that come down on hospital networks and insurance providers that do have HIPAA breaches, or credit card information. I know a lot of regulation and shift in terms of the liability in the credit card space, PCI, et cetera. Being able to make sure that there's compliance, that you're compliant with those regulations, and as you detect sort of shifts and changes that might put you open, being able to predict those things. So yeah, compliance, absolutely. Risk management, all of those sorts of things that aren't necessarily specifically attackers, trying to get something out, but even accidental or inadvertent breaches, or leaving a laptop around, et cetera. Those sorts of things can also be solved with this data, and really taking lots of data, putting it together, and making and pulling together meaningful and actionable and useful intelligence has wide-ranging implications, like you said, far beyond security.
Now, I don't want to pressure you into pre-announcing anything or tipping your hand, but it seems to me that your approach also allows for certain customization levels to be put in place, maybe even rules and policies that go beyond the scope of security, privacy, regulation, but maybe could focus on vertical industries or geographies, or even maybe large enterprises might come to you and say, we want a specific look at what's going on within our particular environment. Is there a level of customization possible? Where do you perhaps see that going, even if it's on a hypothetical basis?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do actually do a good bit of that today. So actually last year, of course, all public, we announced our extension platform, which what that allows us to do is do completely customizable action and collection from the endpoint. So, I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head. We got customers that they had a very specific set of registry keys that they wanted to monitor. They wanted to be able to alert anytime those changed. And we were able to, through the extension platform, deliver that same day, that same functionality. Customization becomes huge, whether or not that's for collection of information around specific or internal applications or other things that they do that are very specific to their environment. And then there's customized action as well, being able to, all of this customization, whether or not that's using flex tables to get new information into our platform, it's using our extensions on the endpoint to collect new information or take new kinds of actions to do, reverse shell callouts or to quarantine a system, and then sort of going a little bit further, when you put your hand on a hot stove, you don't pull your hand back because it was hot. You pull your hand back because you had the reflex action that went straight to your brain that said that's hot, and then you felt the heat afterwards. So there's a lot of cool things we're looking at with respect to sort of the reflex actions, sort of predicting, hey, this may or may not be hot, but let's go ahead and reflex, and then we'll, protect the self first, and then go back and ask questions later. Lots of cool things we're working on around that as well. Analytic capabilities, lots of cool things that we're being able to do on top of the Vertica platform and some of the other things we're doing at the endpoint as well.
Mike, one of my favorite sayings is that architecture is destiny in IT, and I think you've proven that, showing that having the right architecture allows you to have a lot of benefits around extensibility, adaptability, bringing the power of the major trends like the cloud and edge computing and network detection all to bear. But you've also now put in place this platform, this architecture that encourages your customers to be innovative, to start thinking about how to use those customization aspects and build from your platform out to whatever their specific needs are. So that's really great. All right, we're just about out of time. We have a couple of questions from the audience. So here's one for you, Mike. How are you incorporating prescriptive analytics or actionable intelligence? So I think people are looking for how you can be a bit more proactive and use this architecture and these capabilities for actionable and prescriptive analytics and intelligence.
Yeah, so great question. There's a couple things, a couple specific use cases that I can think of around that. So with respect to the sort of the prescriptive side, I mentioned early on sort of the patch management level integration into NVD, and so some cool things that we're able to do is pull in the NVD information about as new vulnerabilities in the CVEs get published. We have all the application information and binaries that are executing in that environment, and being able to connect the dots and say, hey, you know what? It almost becomes like a flu shot. You provide the flu shot, and hopefully it covers as many of the sort of strains of flu that are out there. And so by sort of taking the NVD componentry, which is all the sort of possible strains of flu that are out there, and sort of putting those all together, cross-referencing that sort of with with all the binaries and applications running in the environment, we can start to say, hey, you know what, this system is becoming less and less compliant and becomes more and more at risk for exploit, for intrusion attempts, et cetera, so that we can provide that information to the either the security team or even the operational team to go, update the systems, apply those patches, upgrade the software, whatever the case may be. And those are the sorts of things we can do because of the ability to bring all that data together inside Vertica and start connecting those dots, and then alerting our users so they can take action either through our platform and our extensions and the extensibility of our platform, or through whatever other systems management tools they may be using for those sorts of things. So that's just sort of one example of incorporating that.
Great. And here's another question I imagine comes up a lot, and it looks sort of towards the way things used to be, but it's asking about agents and the amount of tax or drain on resources. People remember that sometimes agents in the past have come with a penalty on performance and so forth. So it's a pretty important question. What's the impact your agents have, and how have you been able to make sure that they don't have a degradation aspect?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and obviously I get asked that question no less than 5 times a day, especially as we position ourselves to be able to collect information from cloud infrastructure and from data centers. Now you start talking about the money-making factor for companies and what the impact has on those endpoints, not just the desktop, right? I mean, certainly it's really annoying when my system gets sluggish. When I've got 4 VMs and I've got my Docker instance all running in my laptop here. Yes, so slowness on the endpoint is absolutely a pain point, but it's even more important for cloud providers or companies that make money from those server endpoints. So we actually are just finishing a white paper, should be going up on our site any day now, on really the difference between how we do collection from the endpoint versus most of the other both legacy, or I hate to say legacy, historical other tools, both in the sort of the AV and malware space, as well as those that sort of compete more directly against us. So the short answer, of course, now that I'm a minute in, is no longer a short answer, but so our agents run at user space. I mentioned it earlier, where we don't have custom kernel modules, we don't have custom drivers. We also a lot of our founders came out of the AV space and were very sensitive to the impact on the system. So as depending on what's happening on the endpoint, we're always looking for user activity on the system. There's lots of reasons why we do that, for license rationalization and some other use cases. But the other reason is so that we are avoiding the impact to the user on the system. So talking about the desktop, laptop, when someone's engaged with the system, we back off on a lot of the calculations and processing that we need to do until they're no longer engaged with the system. So that's one of the things. So obviously the kernel, no driver, so that reduces blue screen impact. It reduces a lot of the CPU impact as we're not trying to inject ourselves into everything. We use a lot of the existing tools that are embedded within the operating systems and take advantage of those rather than trying to recreate the wheel. So from a network quarantine perspective on the endpoint, rather than create our own sort of kernel module that cuts off packet brokering at the kernel level, we utilize the existing tools, whether or not that's Windows Firewall, and can create all sorts of really cool policies to quarantine a system, or using existing tools on Mac or on Linux to do those same sorts of things. And so that same lightweight factor really applies also in the cloud and server environment, wanting to stay as much out of the way as possible. And again, not hooking the kernel is a huge impact on that as well. The last piece is sort of the network overhead and getting data out of the endpoint back to our platform. We want as much data as possible. We have to balance that with the network overhead. We have customers that have our agents running on systems that have a satellite uplink, that may be 15K or even on a dial-up modem, the old 56K or even lower than that. So we have some really compelling compression algorithms for some of the process information that we look at, as well as some of the network information that we can send from the endpoint, and then using a lot of the cool Vertica infrastructure, reconstruct that on the back end and really have some powerful compression to reduce that network overhead footprint as well. So lots of different things we do. It's one of our primary focuses, and one of the things when any customer asks for a new feature and I'm talking with them, the first question I have to ask myself is, does it make our footprint smaller on the endpoint or larger? And it's almost always larger. So then I have to come up with cool ways to make sure that we don't increase our footprint. We're typically sub 1% CPU, 15, 20 megs of memory as you're running. It is very lightweight. And of course, you say that, everybody rolls their eyes, but we've got lots of data points, competitively, that we feel confident in, sort of going head to head. Always worried about being able to work side by side with the AV and anti-malware technologies and staying out of the way of the impact, both on the user as well as the money making in a cloud and data center infrastructure.
Yeah. Once again, the data, analytics, and intelligence coming together for you to then make that agent as efficient as possible and even customize how it's used within a certain environment. That's great. All right, well, I'm afraid we're out of time. I want to thank our audience. We have to leave it there. You've just experienced a Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Voice of the Customer webcast discussion on how Ziften Technologies leverages big data capabilities to provide next-generation endpoint security. And we've heard how Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Vertica delivers the scale, speed, and instant analysis to provide enterprise-wide visibility into today's breed of security ills. Now, there's a lot more information available. Mike has mentioned white papers and other information. You can go to the Ziften Technologies website, or you can go to Vertica website and HPE. Just type those into your search engine, and I'm sure you'll find a lot more very pertinent information. With that, I'd like to thank our guest. We've been here with Mike Hamilton, Senior Vice President of Product at Ziften Technologies in Austin, Texas. Thanks so much, Mike.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Please also look for more information on the Bright Talk site here. This webcast, this live discussion we've had today is going to be available on demand using the same links. So please tell your friends and coworkers about this information if you think it would be applicable to them. Lastly, a big thank you to our audience for joining us. Please look to the resources presented here and gain additional insights into both HPE and Ziften Technologies. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Interarbor Solutions. Thanks again for joining in. Goodbye.